Hi there, my name is Dan Wells and I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction, and I talk about games on the internet. Today, it is of horror that I wish to speak. We're going to look at a game called Dread. Dread is a relatively famous horror RPG among people who know a lot of indie RPGs. Famous because it does not use dice. This is a horror game that uses, for its task resolution mechanic, a Jenga Tower. Okay? This game is brilliant and fraught in relatively equal measure. There are parts of it that I absolutely love, and there are parts of it that do not work for me at all, and that I always house rule away. So, first, let's get into it. There are basically two parts of this game, and they are both incredibly clever. And the first, as you can see, is the Jenga Tower. They just call it the Tower. The rules for this game are simple. There's no dice, there's no numbers, there's no nothing. Anytime your character is going to attempt a risky action, you have to pull a block from the tower. So, what are we looking at here? You pull a block, and then you set it on the top. Yay, I succeeded. There are three options, three possibilities anytime you need to pull a block, anytime you are attempting something risky. Number one, you pull the block, you set it on the top, nothing falls, and you're fine. Your task succeeds, good job. Number two, you abandon the pull, and that means that you fail. Whatever you were trying to do, you can't do, and you screw it up. Okay? Once you're locked in, once the game master says pull a block, you have to pull a block or fail. It's not just that you can back away from the task. You either succeed or you fail. Okay? The third option is that the tower falls down, in which case your character dies. Technically, what happens is your character is removed from the game, which most often involves death, but it can also involve something that isn't. One of the examples they use in the book is, let's say you're playing some kind of mythos game, and your character is a librarian or a scientist or something, and you're trying to translate a book that is written in Latin. Now, if it's possible that your character clearly speaks Latin, you don't have to pull for this. Obviously, you speak Latin and you succeed. But if the game master decides for whatever reason that translating this book is risky enough that it warrants a pull of the block, then you have to pull. But just reading the book doesn't automatically mean, like if you fail to translate Latin, you don't die horribly. But if it is, for example, an ancient tome full of dark secrets like the Necronomicon, then maybe you just go crazy and are removed from the game that way. Alternately, let's say that, again, drawing from the examples in the book, what if this is just a super old cookbook or something? It doesn't have any inherent meaning or danger to it. You know what? If you pull the block and you screw it up, your character's removed from the game, even if there's not a danger. So part of that is your game master's fault for making you pull when there wasn't any inherent danger. But two, you come up with something like, okay, well, you're called away, you've got a relative who's in trouble. Whatever happens, you're removed from the game. That character is gone. Okay? Now, what this creates in practice is an incredibly tense environment, and yes, a mounting sense of dread. As the game goes on, as you have to attempt more and more dangerous things, this tower gets more unstable, and it becomes more and more likely that it is going to fall. And so you're going to get into situations where everyone at the table has kind of backed away from it, and they don't want to touch the table, they don't want to move, they don't want to speak too loud, they don't want to do anything, because if that tower falls, even if it's not part of an action, if that tower falls, somebody is removed from the game. Somebody's going to die. And so it is really a beautiful, beautiful combination of flavor and mechanics. The way that the Jenga Tower works creates a sense of dread, and it is wonderful to watch in action. Now, the other thing that I really dig about this game is the character creation system. Because there are no numbers, because this is an incredibly narrative storytelling game, there aren't really character classes, there's not skills, there's nothing like that. What you have instead is what's called a questionnaire. And each character is going to, or each player is going to have a little questionnaire to fill out. And they're going to be, for example, and you're going to give each player has 10 or 12 questions that will help design their character. And so they give some examples here. So, for example, in a Risen Dead game, if you're going to play a zombie horror game, some of the questions they have: before the apocalypse, what job did you hold at a .com company and what did you enjoy most about it? How do you think the others treat you differently because you are the youngest in the group other than the child? What drug are you now addicted to and why do you keep it secret? So, imagine 10 or 12 questions similar to that will just help define who this character is and create an incredibly rich and compelling background. It's really fun. There are 3 sample scenarios at the end of the game, and it provides lists of questions for each one of them. There you can see character 6. This is in what's basically a Friday the 13th slasher movie kind of scenario called Beneath the Mask. So some of these character 6 questions. You and the head cheerleader have been friends for many years. How did you first meet? What was the first thing you did when you got your braces removed? You received a head injury when you were younger and occasionally lose precious memories when you bump your head. What were you doing when you got hurt? So as you can see, these are ways for the game master, for the host, to kind of engineer specific relationships into the game, to create scenarios, but in a very open-ended way. That head bump thing is something that absolutely could come up during the game, that the character is going to bump their head and suddenly lose some really valuable memories. That's a really great storytelling device. But on top of that, that's also something that the player character can, that the player can use. So maybe they decide, oh, well, I bumped my head because I was climbing a tree. And I've always been this crazy daredevil ever since I was a little kid. And so all of a sudden it becomes like a personality trait as well. There's lots of really great things that this questionnaire system can do. And when you see that there are, 4, 5, 6 players, each with a personalized questionnaire that they fill out in advance and say, okay, well, this and this and this, it does create this just really fascinating web of storytelling, and I really dig it. So, those are the 2 things that are really great about this game: the Jenga Tower and the questionnaire character creation. Now, where does the game fall apart a little bit? Well, first of all, those 2 elements don't combine very well, which is unfortunate. Let's say that you have been given this 12-point questionnaire and you've written answers to each one. I fell out of a tree when I was 5 years old and I had a head injury. I've always been this crazy daredevil. And you give kind of these detailed paragraph answers to all of them. And then you die. How do you get back into the game? The game doesn't actually give any clear direction for what happens when a character is removed from the game. Does that player just have to sit out? Are they just watching everybody for the next 2 hours doing nothing? Do they get to bring a new character into the game? Is there a questionnaire ready for that character? Have they taken the time to fill one out? Do they just get an extra NPC who doesn't have a rich background because there wasn't a questionnaire for them? The really fascinating web of character that the questionnaires create is ideally designed for a longer story in which the characters are going to stick around. If you're playing a horror scenario, especially if it's a one-shot scenario, you have to be ready for these characters to be a little more disposable than those questionnaires make them. If you set this thing up and then they just start dropping like flies, then it can be frustrating. And also, the idea of a role-playing game with player elimination, while it is intriguing, in practice isn't super fun for some of the players. And that's why some of my favorite horror games, like 10 Candles or the Alien RPG, include ways for the the dead characters, players, to jump back in, take over an NPC, tell stories through flashbacks, things like that. They can still be a part of it, even if they're not present as the same character anymore. And so, yeah. Anyway, I think Dread is an absolutely fascinating game, and it is definitely worth your time. You might want to come up with some house rules for what happens to a player when their character dies. You might want to streamline that questionnaire system a little better. Alternately, you might want to take that questionnaire system and apply it to a longer form game that doesn't have so much brutal player elimination and character death in it. Whatever you do, I do recommend that you give this game a try. Dread is a blast. Dread is a very fun one-shot game. Doesn't work very well for long-form stuff, but the best horror games tend to be one-shots anyway, and this one will give you an experience that no other game can provide. And so, despite its flaws, it is absolutely one of my favorite horror games, and one that I love to trot out when I'm at conventions, when I'm putting together a Halloween party, when I've got some friends together and it's time to do something fun. Before I end, I want to talk a little bit more about what's in the book because, I explained the rules to this game in like 30 seconds. So why is there a relatively thick book? It's got like 167 pages. Well, first of all, there are a lot of weird little corner cases you might have questions about, like opposed roles. If one character tries to attack another character, how do you handle that? How do you handle things that are more complicated? A single task might require multiple pulls. There's a little bit of niggly kind of rules information there. But the bulk of the book is actually, there's those 3 scenarios at the end. There's the slasher one, there's like a space horror one where you're going through a Hulk, and there's like a Bigfoot one, a wilderness survival stalked by a monster in the wilderness kind of scenario, which actually, in my opinion, is the best one of the 3. There's also, I want to say 5, but it might be 6 chapters detailing different kinds of games. So let's say you want a game that focuses more on gore, like that Splasher game. Or you want a scenario that focuses more on madness, or something that is about mystery, or you want to go suspense, or you want to bring in supernatural. And it has a chapter on each of these kind of horror subgenres to help you as the game master know how to bring the right elements together and create the right ambiance of horror for that particular flavor. So it's the writers really understand horror and what makes something scary and what makes a game scary, as opposed to simply gory. Which is not to say that gore is not a viable subgenre of horror, but that there is a difference between watching somebody get eaten by a monster and being afraid while you watch someone get eaten by a monster. And this game has a lot of tips in the book about how to do something like that. So anyway, there you go. Here's Dread. Pick up the little book, pretty easily available online. Grab yourself a Jenga Tower out of your grandma's game closet and jump right in. Play this really great horror scenario game. Anyway, I'm Dan Wells, and you are awesome.